So, a question was posed. If I was starting a shop from scratch today, what tools would I get? I just wanted to come on here. I've been very busy the last week or so, and I'll probably be very busy leading into the next year, especially leading up to Christmas. So I may not be as consistent as I normally am. I'll try my best. If you haven't subscribed, I would like you to subscribe and leave a comment. Click the bell notification. If I was starting over again today, the table saw would still be the heart of my workshop. And most likely, I would purchase this same saw again or something similar to it, like the new Harvey line of table saw, which I think is the original equipment manufacturer for this saw. But I would get it with shorter rails. I was concerned about capacity at the time, and I've learned over time that the idea of breaking down a 4x8 sheet on a table saw, in my opinion, in a one-man shop, is a ridiculous is a ridiculous idea. Plywood of that size is awkward, heavy. It's easy to bind the saw with it, and it's very hard to successfully, with experience, you can gain the experience to do it, but even with all the experience that I have, it still is a chore. It's not the table saw, in my opinion. Maybe if you have a larger shop where you have in-feed tables along with out-feed table, you can do it and do a good job with confidence. But in a typical small shop, I don't think it's a good idea to try to break down 4x8 sheets on a table saw. So it's for this reason, I use the table saw mainly for ripping. And I like the idea of the fence and the idea of adding accessories to the fence to where you could use it to do stuff like, data wing, create grooves and so forth like that. You can use it to do joinery, like creating tenons and so forth. So that's what I mainly use it for. The largest ripping capacity I would want on a table saw if I was starting over, 24 inches. Basically a base cabinet. If it can do 24 inches, if you can give me a 24-inch rip, that's all I would need. At least 2 horsepower. You don't necessarily have to be a cabinet saw. At least in my case, I do a lot of sheet material and dimensional material I'm dealing with. I don't need that type of capacity. So, and I don't need that type of power. 2 horsepower would have actually done well. 3 is just extra. I've never had issue with binding on 3. When I used to have a contractor saw, it was a 1.5 horsepower. I would occasionally get stall outs where the machine couldn't make the cut. So I think 2 horsepower would have alleviated that problem. I don't think you necessarily need 3 horsepower. I don't think you need a cabinet saw. What else can I tell you? Dust collection. If I had to do it all over again, shoot, for that matter, if I had to go back to my 20s again, dust collection would have played a major factor in everything I do. Or should I say protection from dust. Like be wearing face masks, which I never used to do when I was younger. Dust collection and tools. If I had to start all over again, I would start that from day one. It won't be an afterthought. So definitely the overhead dust collection and some type of dust collection and guard device in one. I like that whole concept. I definitely would have gone that route. The Festool dust collector, or any type of good dust collector that has HEPA filtration, I highly recommend for the same reason, for your lungs. And the Dust Deputy, which is made by a company by the name of Oneida. I think it's called Oneida. But it's a dust separator. It uses cyclonic action and takes most of the debris out of the air before it gets to the filter. And in my case, the filter bag, the Festool filter bags are very expensive. So it will save you a lot on filter bags. And while I'm on that topic, my larger Cyclone vacuum made, this one in this case is a Sharp Fox, is a 1.5 horsepower. I recommend Cyclone or larger. 1.5 works for me because I only use one machine at a time. I'm a one-man shop. So you're talking about under $1,000, you can get a nice Cyclone vacuum system. Highly, highly recommend that. That has been very good to me. It's worked very well. This is not for everyone, but I would purchase my Capex Mitre saw again, based on my experiences with it. It's a very accurate saw, and it not only is it accurate, it's very good at collecting the dust. It's actually one of the superior saws, Mitre saws out there when it comes to dust collection. So I would definitely get the Capex, and I'll primarily use the Capex for making miters and crosscut under 12 inches. That's within the limits of that saw. Believe it or not, if I could buy the, I don't know, let me put it this way. If I was starting from scratch and without the knowledge, when I say without the knowledge, without the abilities that I have now, and I just wanted to get going, I probably would have bought the MFT. But with the knowledge of what I know now, as far as its limitations, I would have probably gotten a basic one and get the accessory from Dashboard and Benchdog UK. The Incra fence, definitely. Everything I described in that previous video is what I would have done. I wouldn't have gotten it with the MFT accessories. I wouldn't have gotten the angle gauge. I wouldn't have gotten the other components. I would have bought the 55-inch guide rails separately. I probably would have gotten that in a kit with the TS55, which is another tool that I would have gotten from day one. I would have gotten the TS55 with at least a 106-inch guide rail. I don't know if I would have gotten the Festool guide rails, because I think the Makita guide rail work with the Festool saws, track saws, and it's at least like $100 less. You get anything over 106-inch, and you basically talking about a contractor saw concerning Festool tracks. So once again, I would have gotten a 106-inch is the minimum. I mean, it barely allows you to cut an 8-foot long sheet. 106-inch rail will allow you to break down an 8-foot sheet, rip it along its length. For cross-cutting that, breaking it down to make it manageable for the table saw, I would use the GRS16 by TSO Products. It's a device I mentioned in the previous video that turns your guide rail basically into a machinist square. That is also a worthwhile product as far as breaking down sheet goods. Now, once I got that sheet good down into manageable pieces I needed for my project, not final dimension, all of this is rough dimensions. Once I get it down to manageable size, then I will utilize the table saw to bring it to final dimension. I'll use a table saw for ripping, and I will use the MFT or something similar to it for cross-cutting. Going back to the table saw. The table saw has gotten a bad rap. Actually, the bad rap the table saw has gotten, I think, is completely unfair and is completely unwarranted. The table saw is mindless. The table saw is no more or no less dangerous than any other tool or machine in the shop with a blade. I promise you this. All the scary stuff you hear people say, it's not the fault of the table saw. It's not the fault of the manufacturer of the table saw. Every one of these devices come with protective equipment. Every one of them comes with a manual that tells you the do's and the don'ts of the equipment. In almost every, if not all, situation concerning table saw injury is the fault of the operator. That's just simply the truth. I don't know how other way I can put this. It's the fault of the user. And I think this new idea going around with this, everybody knows the saw. Everybody else talking about it is, the one that doesn't cut wieners. Whoever came up with the idea of using wieners on a saw. Anyway, the one that doesn't cut wieners, I think it gives the wrong idea in the shop. It's a solution in search of a problem. If the only tool you use in a shop that had a spinning blade was a table saw, I would believe in that technology wholeheartedly. I don't have a problem with the technology per se. I just have a problem with it in the shop. In the shop where you have other spinning blades, that's not going to stop for your stupidity. It's not going to stop for your carelessness. It's not going to stop for your arrogance. The idea that you could become even more overconfident and do more stupid things, take more stupid risk because you have this one, notice what I'm saying, one and only safety net in the shop, and that is on that saw. If you continue that mindset and that behavior with your other power tools, what do you think is going to happen? I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You're going to hear fewer and fewer people getting cut by table saws. You're going to start hearing more and more people getting cut by bandsaws, miter saws, joiners, routers, which, by the way, I think they are underreported, the other tools. It's just like most things in life. The big, bad, scary thing, kind of like the pit bull, the myth of the pit bull. There are many other breeds of dogs that has that pit bull terrier look and characteristic. And the typical American pit bull terrier will get blamed for every dog that looks like be a mastiff or any of those other type dogs. I bite somebody, all of a sudden now it was a pit bull attack. It's my suspicion this is the same thing with the table saw. At an emergency room, those people don't know anything about woodworking. You got cut by a saw, you got cut by a table saw. You got injured woodworking on a joiner, I'm willing to bet you get logged underneath a table saw most of the time. So you'll be surprised. Not to say that there's not a lot of injuries, because people use this saw very carelessly. But anyway, this is not about a table saw. Off of that rant. I have a video that I get into that a little bit. So I wouldn't get if you really want a saw stop, do that, but I personally wouldn't get one. A bandsaw, I will get. I'll tell you why. It's not really at the top of my list. Probably should be, but because I don't use that much. That's why it's not on the top of my list. But it has a little special place in my workflow. When I buy dimensional lumber from the mill, is a lot of times, depending on the type of lumber, it has a lot of stresses and tensions and so forth like that that's inside that piece of board. And when you try to cut it, it can react violently. It's a whole lot safer to make those type of cuts when you're breaking down those boards, those newly purchased boards that you're trying to break down to rough dimensions on a bandsaw. So I would get a bandsaw. You don't need that big of a bandsaw. Mine has a riser. That's for someone that wants to do something like resawing and so forth. If you're into that, it would be a benefit to you. The way I use a bandsaw is purely for roughing stock. Stock that I would be uncomfortable ripping on a table saw because of that same phenomenon. Not only could burst open, it can also pinch. It can violently close on itself. For dimensioning stock and flattening and so forth, like prepping stock, starting over, if I had the funds, I would get a combination machine for small shop. A 12-inch combination machine. Combination in that it would combine a planer with a jointer. And that's mainly for space. The idea of having both of those tools in one unit would save a lot of space in a small shop. But if I didn't have the funds for that, I would get a floor standing 6-inch jointer, and a tool I really have grown to love and appreciate is the DeWalt DW735. The one that looks like a little army tank and literally built like a little army tank, in my opinion. I've seen the other kinds, the lunchbox looking kinds. I don't think any of them compare to this as far as the stoutness and, the reliability of this. Another very useful and powerful power tool that I would have in my arsenal if I was starting a shop again from scratch would be the Craig Foreman. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to be notified when new content is dropped on this channel, like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and drop a comment down below.